there. Venerable Bumyun Sunim, thank you much for taking my question today. My question has to do with my relationship with my wife. And I'll start by saying that my relationship with my wife is really good. And I'd say that we probably agree on 99% of things. And so obviously my question is about the 1% today. And I suspect that after I tell you my problems, a lot of people might be actually wishing they had problems like mine. So we'll see. But my problem stems from the fact that because of her upbringing, my wife tends to be very, very frugal. And usually that's a really great thing. But there's one thing that's bothering me, which is that when we in our life together, especially when we were raising our kids, there was a church that we attended that was very important to me because I share those values from that church. And now that my kids have grown, and especially during the pandemic, I have not been attending that church very often. And yet I still would like to continue to give an annual donation to that church because it means a lot for me in my history. And also I really strongly believe in the social justice and racial justice work that the church is doing. And yet my wife repeatedly, because we no longer attend that church on a regular basis, repeatedly asks me to stop donating to that church. And that kind of pains me because I still feel a very strong social connection to the people who go to that church. And so I was wondering if you have any suggestions for me of how I can handle this.
네, 그러면 교회에도 열심히 나가면서 기부하는 게 좋겠느냐, 교회는 좀 잘 안 나가면서 기부하는 게 좋겠느냐, 둘 중에 부인이 권하는 대로 하겠다, 이렇게 한번 제안을 해보세요.
So I suggest you give your wife two choices. The first choice is that you continue donating, but you start going back to church often. The second is the status quo. You don't go to church that often, but you still keep donating.
Sounds like a good solution. And so she's likely to be unhappy with those choices.
교회도 안 나가면서 보시한다고 문제 제기하니까 그러면 교회 열심히 나가면서 보시하겠다, 이렇게 말해보라는 거예요.
So basically her logic opposing the donation is that you're not going there often enough to justify a donation. So you're coming back to her with a logic that says, okay, I'm going to start going often enough to justify the donation and see what she says.
그럼 아내가 뭐라 그럴 것 같아요?
Then what do you think your wife will say?
I think that she truly would like me to stop being involved in that church and start attending more completely with Jungto. My guess is that that's what she would really like me to do.
예, 부처님의 가르침이 은혜를 입었으면 은혜를 갚아라 하는 거기 때문에 내가 아이들을 키울 때 교회로부터 많은 은혜를 입었으니까 아직 좀 더 갚아야 된다. 그러니 여보 조금만 기다려줘요. 이렇게 얘기하면 어떨까 싶어요. 그게 부처님의 가르침이지 않느냐고.
The Buddha's teaching is all about giving back for what you've got. So, try to explain that, you've gotten a lot of benefits, especially when your children were young, from that church, and you still have a little bit of more debt to pay back.
스님께 여쭤보니까 정토에 도네이션 하는 거를 당분간 그 교회 하라 이렇게 얘기하더라고. 얘기해 주세요.
And also tell her that you asked Venerable Bumyun what to do, and he said, instead of donating to Jungto, for now, continue donating to the church.
I actually, I told her that I'd like to make an equal donation to Jungto, but for her, she wanted all the money to Jungto, not to split half and half.
네, 그래도 옛날에 교회로부터 우리 아이들이 받은 은혜가 있으니까 아직 은혜를 좀 더 갚는 게 좋겠다 이렇게 생각합니다.
So I think, since you believe that you received a lot of grace from the church, especially when your children are growing up, if there's some debt still left over for you to pay back.
그 돈이 교회에서 잘못 쓰인다면 좀 고려해 볼 필요가 있지만은 잘 쓰인다면 우리는 어디든지 잘 쓰이는 곳에 도네이션을 하면 됩니다.
If that money is not being used well by the church, then there's a different problem altogether because we want to donate to places in which the money will be put to good use. But if it is being put to good use, then I think that's fine.
우리가 볼 때는 교회니 절이니 이렇게 서로 달리 보이지만은 더 높은 곳에서 내려다 본다면 교회니 절이니 하는 것은 하나의 인류 세계 안에 있는 서로 다른 모양이기 때문에 큰 문제는 되지 않습니다.
When we see differences, when we see church versus a Buddhist temple, but if you just take your vantage points a little higher up, these things are just constructs that we human beings create in our society, and I don't think it really matters.
그래서 당분간 부인께 양해를 구하고 교회에 계속 도네이션을 하는 게 좋을 것 같아요.
So I think with your wife's permission, for a while, just continue donating to that church.
부인이 조금 불만이 있으면 스님이 받은 걸로 하겠다고 감사히 받은 걸로 하겠다고 전해주세요.
And if your wife still has complaints, tell her that I would consider that donation to be made to Jongto.
네.
Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate that.
원래 내 살아온 습관대로 하면 교회도 가고 교회도 도네이션 해야 되는데 정토 만나서 도네이션은 교회 하고 마음 공부는 물질은 교회 하고 정신적인 도네이션은 정토에 한다. 그렇게 좀 나눠서 하다가 나중에 또 봐서 또 하나로 통일하겠다. 이런 관점을 가지면 좋겠습니다.
So I think the perspective you can bring bear to the situation is that, there's a relationship, previous relationship, and the habit of donating to that church. So from material basis, continue donating to the church. But now that you have met Jongto, also kind of donate your effort in trying to continue your study of the minds with Jongto. And maybe down the line, those two can come together or not. Maybe, that's the vantage point you should bring to this issue.
이 질문을 받으니까 제 친구인 신부님과의 대화가 생각이 납니다.
This question actually reminds me of the conversation I had with a friend of mine who is a Catholic priest.
신부님 중에 친구가 있는데 크리스마스 때는 늘 제가 방문하고 초파일 때는 그분이 절에 방문합니다.
So with this friend, I always go over to his church, to his chapel on Christmas, and he comes over to our temple on Buddha's birthday.
예, 우리 정토 멤버들 중에는 과거에 캐톨릭에 다녔던 분들도 제법 있습니다.
Among the Jongto members, there's quite a few who's been a Catholic, who's been a Catholic.
네, 그래서 캐톨릭 출신 정토의 멤버를 데리고 제가 그 크리스마스 날 캐톨릭 성당을 방문했습니다.
So on Christmas, I would take a group of Jongto members who's been a Catholic and visit his church.
제가 신부님께 소개를 하면서 당신이 잃어버린 어린 양들을 제가 이렇게 데리고 왔습니다. 이렇게 소개를 했습니다.
And as I say hello to him on Christmas, I would tell him that I brought back the lost sheep, that that strayed from his flock.
그랬더니 신부님께서 하시는 말씀이 재미있었습니다.
And the priest responded back in kind. It was kind of funny how he said it.
어린 양들은 스님이 대신 보호해 주시고 11조는 교회에 내도록 하면 되겠습니다. 했어요.
And he said, you know what, you take care of the lost lambs, but, you can donate your tithe to me.
지금 질문자 케이스하고 비슷합니다.
Similar to your case, I think.
그 신부님이 뭐 돈을 밝힌다 그런 뜻이 아니라 우리가 그런 농담을 했다는 거예요.
I'm not saying that the priest was being greedy or material or anything. It was that they kind of reminded me of that moment of sharing a joke between two friends.
우리는 사람들이 교회 가느냐 절에 가느냐 그걸 갖고 신부님과 저 사이에 그걸 갖고 특별히 중요하게 여기지 않는다는 거예요.
Well, what this really says, what I'm trying to say is that we don't consider kind of membership in one organization or the other that important to us.
제가 교회 가서 설교를 하면 이 신자들이 박수를 신부님 할 때보다 더 많이 친대요.
They tell me when I actually give sermon in his church, I receive more applause than he does.
그러면 신부님이 농담으로 질투 섞인 농담을 해요.
Then he kind of half jokes at me with a sense of jealousy.
내가 할 때는 박수를 적게 치더니 왜 스님한테 많이 치냐 이렇게.
He jokingly scolds his own congregation, saying that how come he gets more applause than I do?
그럼 제가 더 잘해서가 아니라 맨날 먹는 떡보다 새로운 떡이 별미라서 그렇다. 너무 질투하지 마세요. 제가 이렇게 얘기해요.
Then I half jokingly respond back, said that it's not me that I give a better sermon. It's that they're kind of used to you and kind of bored with your sermons anyway. So anything fresh is probably tastes better.
네, 질문자가 손든 것 같은데 아닌가요?
Gonna say something?
This is necessarily not necessarily about my particular question about donating to the church or not, but just in a larger sense, I'm not sure. I mean, my wife values your sentiments, and so hopefully she will take that to heart. But in some situations, when we don't have you to weigh in on settling the score, it's also like I'm very adamant that I want to continue donating, for example, and she's very adamant that she doesn't want that. Just in having relationships, how to resolve that with the least amount of conflict. Like I'm going to continue donating and she's going to continue being upset about that. That's, I guess, kind of deeper to my question. Like what would happen if there were a different question that you weren't here to arbitrate, and how can I still be comfortable and keep my marriage strong despite the fact that we have those very different feelings, I guess. And I don't want to take other questioners' time, but maybe that's a question for another day, perhaps.
그 정토회가 관계되니까 아내가 만약에 정토회 멤버라면 이런 정도는 수용을 해야 정토 멤버라고 할 수 있습니다.
Since your wife is a member of Jungto, as a member of Jungto, this level of conflict or debate is something that she would deal with.
그러나 이게 일반적인 경우는 조금 다릅니다.
However, it's a little different maybe in other kind of normal circumstances.
누가 옳고 그런 것이 아니라 서로 의견이 다르다는 겁니다.
It's not that somebody's right or wrong. It's just that you share a different opinion.
뭐 세 가지 경우를 선택할 수가 있습니다.
In that case, you have three options you can choose.
서로 대화를 해서 의견의 일치를 보는 겁니다.
Number one is come to an agreement through a conversation.
네, 그러니까 교회 도내셔야 하는 거를 아내가 수용해 주든지 아니면 아내의 의견에 질문자가 수용해서 도네이션을 스탑하든지 그 두 케이스 중에 하나를 결정하는 겁니다.
Basically, either you stop donating by respecting your wife's opinion, or your wife respects your choice and you keep donating.
두 번째는 아내는 정토에 도네이션하고 나는 교회 도네이션하고 이렇게 각각 자기 역할을 하도록 합의하는 겁니다.
Or second, come to an agreement in terms of kind of splitting responsibilities. So your wife donates to Jungto and you continue donating to the church.
세 번째는 순차적으로 하는 겁니다.
The third is, sequential.
몇 년까지 앞으로 3년이면 3년, 5년이면 5년까지만 하겠다 하고 약속하는 겁니다.
You know, so make an agreement in which that you say, you know what, I'm going to continue donating for the next 3 years or 5 years.
이렇게 서로 대화를 통해서 합의점을 찾아갈 수 있습니다.
And so you can come to some kind of consensus agreement through your conversations.
이것은 나쁜 일 하자는 게 아니라 좋은 일 하자는 겁니다.
Because you're not planning for something bad. You're discussing a choice between goods.
이것 때문에 다툴 이유는 없습니다.
So there's no reason for you to kind of be conflicted about such discussions.
뭐 아내의 그 주장이 완강하다면 선생님이 양보할 수도 있습니다.
Then, you know, if your wife insists very strongly, then maybe you can concede, compromise.
네, 뭐 교회 도네이션 하나, 아내에게 도네이션 하나, 하나님께서 보시기에 큰 차이가 없을 겁니다.
So in a way, you know, instead of donating to the church, you're kind of donating your concession to your wife. Not a big difference.
Thank you very much.
네, 그러면 다른 특별한 의견이 없으면 질문자들의 소견을 들어보겠습니다.
If nobody has any further thing to add to this conversation, let's go back to our questioners and
네.
listen to their comments.
Been thinking about at the end of my question when you were answering, you talked about 3 different outcomes, and one would be that when 2 sides disagree, one side would capitulate to the other side. That's solution number 1. Solution number 2 is that they compromise, and each one takes care of their own. And the third one was that they would take turns. I suppose that this is a question for another day, but that kind of is based on the premise that the main goal is to come to some kind of agreement. And I'm guessing sometimes there are times when you just can't agree, and thinking about how we can still be happy even though we can't change other people's opinions, and we can't agree sometimes. So anyway, not another question, just a comment that we don't always get that resolution that we want.
어느 것도 동의가 안 될 때는 당분간 갈등하면서 각자 좀 살아보는 겁니다.
If you can't come to a compromise, then, you know, for a while you live in a state of conflict.
네, 그러다가 갈등이 좀 심해지면 어떤 것 중에 하나를 선택하게 됩니다.
Then the conflict becomes a little too much for you to bear, then you make a choice then.